All right, welcome back, all you headbangers. My name is Alan, and it's that time again. Let's talk metal. Today, I've got a really crazy topic planned that I think everybody will enjoy. No matter what kind of hobby you're into, it's always fun to figure out what are the really top dollar items, what are the really rare and super expensive and valuable things in that field, whether you're into comic books or stamps or coins or whatever. It's people enjoy sort of figuring out, oh man, what are like the 10 rarest things and the 10 most expensive things. They're out of the price range for most collectors and most fans, of course, but it's still kind of cool just to get to see those things sometimes. So what I've put together for today is a look at some heavy metal records that typically sell for $1,000 or more. And they're records that you've probably never heard of. Now, right away, I'm not claiming these are the most expensive heavy metal records of all time. And I'm purposefully sort of avoiding bigger name bands, which of course have some very expensive items in their catalogs. Instead, I've gone for the really obscure ones that, even though not many people have heard of these bands, they still bring an enormous prize when they come up for sale. So without further ado, let's see what kind of things we've got. I do want to make a few more points, though, before we start down our list. First big thing to point out is I am not a walking price guide. I am not claiming that the prices you see quoted here are exactly what the record is worth, and you can take that to the bank and every copy is going to sell for that. Not at all. What I've done here is I've gone back through lists where I've kept an eye on auctions and heavy metal vinyl for decades now. And I've pulled together a list of records I have consistently seen sell for at least $1,000. Okay, so that's going to rule out some things right away. On any given day, a record can bring a crazy price. Some records have brought $1,000 like once upon a time, but typically they don't bring nearly that much. I'm not including that kind of stuff. Again, I wanted to look for records that consistently hit that $1,000 mark. I feel even today, if they came up for sale, somebody could ask $1,000 or more and have a reasonable chance of getting that price. But keep in mind, prices do change. Sometimes they'll just naturally change over time. If a lot of copies of a rare record are found and introduced onto the market, that can drive the price way down for a long time, especially when you're dealing with obscure titles like the ones I'm going to show you today. These are not your Iron Maidens and Judas Priests and Slayers that have legions of fans who want their stuff. These are bands most people have never really heard of, and as such, it doesn't take a lot of copies to meet demand, and then the price can come way down. Another huge thing that we got to keep in mind with records is condition. Even very rare records will sell pretty cheap sometimes if they're in very poor condition. Heavy metal collectors are known to be sticklers for condition in a lot of cases. If the record has, a cut corner, the cutout mark, one or two skips, that's enough to take a huge chunk out of the price tag, and it's going to sell a lot cheaper than it might otherwise. Right? And again, I want to make the point that no, I don't own these. The reasons I'm showing you pictures rather than real records is I don't have this kind of stuff. This is getting a bit out of my league. But again, it's still fun to window shop a little bit and discuss those really high dollar items in your field. All right, so let's start the list with one that is relatively well known among the heavy metal obscurities. It's the Paradoxx Plan of Attack 12-inch EP. Paradoxx was a band out of Chicago. They had a song on a compilation here and a compilation there, and they made this one 12-inch EP. The story on this one is pretty infamous, and it's been well known in collector's circle for decades. What happened was the band had a bunch of copies pressed up, and they were going to have a local release party in the Chicago area for this. When the band went to pick the albums up at the pressing plant, they didn't like the way it turned out. I don't know exactly what their issue was, if they didn't like the way the graphics looked on the cover or what. But they didn't like it. And as such, they picked up one box to take to the release party. A box contains about 50 copies. And they told the label, yeah, we'll come back and pick the rest of those up later, and they never did. And so eventually the other however many copies they pressed were recycled. And so according to legend, only 50 copies made it out of that pressing plant. And that is why this one has always been one of those mythical sort of high dollar items amongst collectors of 80s US metal. What kind of price are we looking at for Paradoxx? Well, what I'm going to do for each of the 10 records on this list is I've gone to Popsike and done screen captures to show you some of the auctions that have closed over time. If you're in the market for a copy of Plan of Attack, let's move my screen out of the way so you can see these numbers better. You're looking at something in the neighborhood of $8 grand for some copies, $4 grand for other copies. And so again, you can see there's a big difference in price between these. Going from $4,000 to $8,000 is a big difference. It may be little differences such as condition. The Paradoxx EP is supposed to have an insert, and some copies still have it, some copies don't. Would a copy sell for this much if it came on the market today? I don't know. But we can see there are multiple copies that have gotten up into that $4,000 and $8,000 range. I think you'd have a hard time getting that for very many copies. One thing you'll notice here is that the top two pictures, it's the exact same picture. It's the same copy of the album. It was bought in, let's see, March 2016, and then resold about a year later in July 2017. One thing I'll point out about the Paradoxx EP, even though it was limited to, again, allegedly only 50 copies making it into the wild, this is one where I've seen a lot of copies offered for sale over time. And again, it could be the same copies getting bought, somebody keeps it for a few years, and then they sell it when they need to buy a new car or make a down payment on a house or something. But this one has turned up on a somewhat regular basis over the years, more so than some of the other titles that we'll see on this list. But yeah, this is going to be the most expensive thing that I show you today. Getting up into that $8 grand, $4 grand range, I think you'd have no problem probably clearing the $2,000 mark with a nice, clean copy of it these days. And as you can see, though, it could go much, much higher than that. All right, let's move on to number 2. We'll stay in Chicago for another high dollar rarity here. This is from a band called Amethyst. Not as well known as Paradoxx even. Amethyst made this one 12-inch EP called Outside of Nowhere back in 1984. It's shown in the picture there. The cover art lacks a little bit. Somebody was watching Spinal Tap, I assume. Anyway, musically, I like this one a lot. It's really catchy. It's got some good hooks to it, some very straightforward songs. If you want a really detailed description of the album and the music, I've written a review for this particular EP. You can find it over on the Colosseum website. I do album reviews for that site under the name Night's Blood, so you can find it in the album review section if you want to read about it in detail. Today, we're looking more about, how much do these things bring? So how much for an Amethyst EP? This one, several copies over the past few years have gotten into the $2,000 range. And again, the dates on these, you always want to look and see, is there a trend? Has it gone up or down over time? But we can see at least 3 copies going back to 2011 made it over the $2,000 mark. I've always been a little surprised this one sells for so much. While it's a good EP, personally I like it, the music is not particularly heavy or over the top. And usually the records that people really clamor for are more in that category. It's also one that I've heard used to not be that difficult to find. That back, for instance, during the 1990s, dealers would have multiple copies of this thing that had never really sold. Now again, maybe those stories are exaggerated or people have misremembered things. I did not see lots of copies of this back in the 90s. It was not on my radar at the time. But if you want it today, yeah, it's a pretty expensive item. You'd be hard-pressed to get it for under 4 figures. Unless, of course, you just have one of those eureka moments and happen to wander onto it in a flea market or something like that for $1. And if you do, That's great. That's what you want to have happen. Okay, number 3 on our list today is Leather Nuns, Take the Night. This is one from Florida, recorded in '86, full-length album this time. And this one's always had a good reputation among heavy metal fans as being a really solid album. It's got the very striking album cover, cool band name. Those things do help when you're getting into these very rare items. With this one, I usually see a number of around 500 copies cited for how many were pressed, so it had a pretty small press run. I've seen other people cite smaller numbers of like 300. One thing you have to keep in mind is you will see some varying accounts, especially on these obscure items. People didn't necessarily pay a lot of attention to things like print sizes back then. And these are records that are now, over 30 years old. It can be hard to remember those details after several decades. So, how much will a copy of Leather Nun set you back? This one has repeatedly gotten into that sort of $1,200 and $1,500 price range, even as far back as the mid 2000s. Now, the top auction here that's much higher at $2,500. This again is where you have to look at the details. This one says that it actually included a test pressing copy of the album. I think I remember the details of this auction, that it was like a regular copy and a test pressing copy, so you were almost getting like 2 copies of it at the same time, which is why that auction ended up so much higher than the other ones. It's not a record I've seen other copies get up to that $2,000 mark for, but the $1,000, $1,200, $1,500, yeah, it's hit that one pretty consistently over several years. So another high dollar one there. It's not the only high dollar one that came out of Florida in 1986. Oddly, there's another one that fits that description, and it's the Iron Cross self-titled LP, which is shown here. Great heavy metal looking cover to it. And this one is a real ass kicker. The music on this is pretty heavy, pretty raw. Really good album. I like this one a lot. Sadly, I do not own a copy of it. Something I will point out, however, is that a lot of these things have had reissues. You can track down reissued versions of a lot of these albums for a very reasonable price. You can, of course, just listen to them on YouTube. So you can check this stuff out without having to break the bank in order to hear it. The Iron Cross material got a really nice package done by OPM Records many years ago. There's also some pretty cheap reissues of this one done. But yeah, if you just want, a cheap CD press just to hear the main songs on it, those are okay too. The Iron Cross is another one that was reportedly printed up in very small quantities. I've seen numbers cited around 300. Some people have said as low as 100 for that. And if you're looking for a copy of Iron Cross, here's a couple of auctions where it's cleared the $1,000 mark. Now, some other things turned up in the Popsike search here, so ignore this third entry. The one down here that sold for $662, notice that's all the way back in 2008. So 2 things about that. It's 12 years old, but February 2008 is also when the recession was kicking in really bad, and it did have an impact on record prices because, well, people didn't have money for lots of things, much less heavy metal rarities. Today, again, I am not a price guide. I can't tell you exactly what it'd bring, but I feel pretty confident you could get $1,000 for a copy of it today, which makes me very sad because I'd love to have it. And no, I'm not going to pay $1,000 for a copy of the Iron Cross record. But it is a really cool album, one you should check out. All right, moving along to our next entry, we've got Liquid Earth. This is a really obscure band from California. They made 2 vinyl releases back in the day. They made a 7-inch single, which is also very hard to find and will sell for hundreds of dollars when it turns up. But they also made this 12-inch called Molten Rock. This is a 12-inch single. There's only 2 songs, 1 song on each side. Liquid Earth had a very quirky sound. It's very heavy music, but it's kind of off the wall. It's a little bit hard to describe. If you are familiar with other US 80s metal bands such as Red Machete or Max Planck or Zinner, the one that's spelled it Xinr. It's got that same very sort of oddness to it that those bands have, where they're very, very heavy, but it's not that they're amateurish, but it's just that they've got sort of a very wacky delivery in a way. Personally, I've heard this one, I like it. I think both songs on it are pretty cool. It's definitely got its own sound though. So the Liquid Earth 12-inch, if you're looking for a copy of that, this is another one that gets up in that $1,200 to $1,500 range on many occasions. The bottom copy listed there fell just short of that. This is another one where very few people have ever heard of it, but very few copies have ever turned up. And this is one where condition can be an issue as well. Several of the copies that have surfaced over the years have water damage on the covers. In particular, down here along the bottom edge, you can find copies where a significant portion of the cover is water damaged. Some of them have just a little bit here and there. But so yeah, finding a really, really pristine copy of this one is difficult, and would cause a copy to sell even higher. All right, next up on our list, going to Texas, we've got the 12-inch EP from a band called Wizard. And this one has another little weird sort of wrinkle to it. There are two different versions, as you can see here. The version on the left is the first press. It was called Future Nights. And then it got a reissue within a year of the original where they slightly changed the artwork and retitled it Knights of Metal. I don't know the backstory on that. I do not know why they felt that it needed to be altered a little bit when they repressed it. This is one that it clicks all the right boxes with collectors. It's got cool fantasy looking art with the skeleton guy in knight's armor on the horse. So it's playing into the fantasy tropes that appeals to a lot of heavy metal fans. It's from Texas. And yes, that makes a difference. The Texas metal scene in the 80s is considered one of the best in the entire US. That adds a little bit to the price. It's got a cool looking name. It's got a cool looking title. Some folks might think it's kind of generic, but to folks that are really deep, hardcore into this 80s US metal, those things matter. And if you're going to pay these high dollar prices for records like this, you got to be pretty into this stuff. How much would a Wizard EP set you back? I've never seen any real distinction in price between the two copies. They seem to sell for pretty similar amounts. And this is one, we're in that same kind of price range, 1,800, 1,800, 1,200, 1,000. So you're, again, looking at spending at least $1,000 for this. And again, on any given day, it could be more than that. You'll see copies of lots of these records I'm talking about today occasionally pop up on eBay or Popsike, or on Discogs with much higher prices than what we're seeing today. And that's why it's important to remember you always want to look at what things have sold for, not what people are asking for them. I've had people, offer me copies of this record for $3,000. I try not to laugh at them. So like, even if I was inclined to pay a huge price for this record, I wouldn't pay you that. I'm not aware of copies really selling in that range. Maybe they do. Again, I don't know every single copy that gets sold. I know some copies that get sold behind the scenes, others I don't. Some things auctioned online get archived, some don't. But again, sometimes people will see these crazy listings on Discogs and whatnot, and they start to think that's what the album is worth. You're better off looking at what the copies have actually sold for. A lot of times people just put a big price tag hoping somebody will buy it, or at least make them a good offer, and they can negotiate from there. But yeah, if you want to negotiate for a copy of Wizard, you're probably going to still be working in the $1,000 and up range, regardless of whether you get the first press or the second press. All right, up next, we have another Texas metal rarity, and another one from 1986. I tell you, if you could go back in time to 1986 and buy a lot of these little obscure heavy metal records from that year, yeah, you'd be sitting pretty these days. This is another one that just checks off all the boxes. It's from Texas. It's got a cool logo. It's got a cool name. The singer, sings in this really high register, very talented. It's very heavy, kind of technical sounding a little bit on the Sibling here, and people really dig it. This is one where the printing size is often cited as only 100 copies, so that's very, very few to go around. Let's see what Popsike tells us about the Sibling. This is one that will push the $3,000 mark on occasion. Another copy there at $2,550. So yeah, this one's even $1,000 or so more expensive than most of the things that have been on the list I've gone through today. Little thing to notice here, if you go down to the fourth copy, it looks like, whoa, $110. What's with that? Did somebody get a real bargain or what? Now, if you look at the picture, it's a 7-inch copy. And the 7-inch copies, those are bootlegs that were made much later. The high dollar version is the 12-inch version. So again, you can get copies of the Sibling on a 7-inch bootleg for a lot less money if you just want to sort of own a copy without having to, sell your pancreas or something on a black market. There are ways to get this stuff without paying a fortune for it. All right, staying in Texas for yet another one from 1986. This is from a band called Metal Merchant. They did a self-titled EP, and this one's kind of an oddity. As you can see there, it's another pretty low-budget affair. This was on a legit record label, but they didn't do other metal stuff. They put out other kinds of music over time. I've heard this one as well. It's pretty standard mid-80s US metal. It's not bad. It's nothing to write home about necessarily. One thing that's always been a little odd about this is when you look at the band members there, they look to be a bit older than your typical mid-80s US heavy metal band. Usually those are bands that were full of teenagers, and a lot of times still in high school. And these dudes kind of look like they've been around the block a few times. Not sure what's up with that. Maybe they were a band that had existed for a while and then sort of switched names and gears to hop onto the heavy metal craze in the mid-80s. I don't know. But what I do know is it's not a cheap record to obtain. So here's the results at the top of Popsike. This is one that it's flirted with that $2,000 price on occasion, but you've got several there that are more like in the $1,000 to $1,700 range. Now this is one I feel would probably be a little cheaper today. This is a case where a few more copies have turned up, copy here, copy there. It's not a well-known band. The music is, again, it's okay. There's nothing bad about it, but it's not an instant classic or anything. So the number of people that want this and want it badly enough to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars for it, that's a pretty small number. For example, I've seen a couple of copies of this come up for sale on eBay with a buy it now price of $800, $900, and it sits there. And it sits there. And you check on it weeks later, and it's still sitting there. People are not rushing out all the time to pay this kind of price tag for it. Notice, too, that a lot of these auctions with the higher price tag, none of them are newer than 2017. So over the past few years, I think enough copies of this one have turned up that it might be, inching down below that $1,000 mark now. All right, just a couple more to go. Number 9 on our list is the one non-US record I picked for the list. And this is the Flames of Hell album called Fire and Steel. It's made in Iceland in 1987. And you can probably tell from the cover right away, first off, you're dealing with something kind of amateurish. And second off, you're dealing with something a bit heavier than normal. I have no idea what's up with that weird critter insect hellion thing in the artwork, but I'm pretty sure it's the reason I wake up screaming in the middle of the night at least once a month. That thing's just freaky looking. The story behind this one's also kind of infamous. It was made by a bunch of teenagers, really young kids, and it was recorded in the basement of their local YMCA building. The YMCA there had actually set up like a little recording studio for local kids to come in and just kind of goof around and, hey, here's some instruments, make some noise, make a little tape to play for mom and dad, ha ha ha. And these kids thought, really? So we can just have at it and make a recording? Okay, then, we're going to record this. First thing to note is Flames of Hell, it's got a very, very amateurish sound to it. These are not folks that were long acquainted with their instruments, let's say. Stylistically, I guess you would describe it as having sort of a very raw, blackened thrash metal sound. Put it, like first Venom record, first two Bathory records, but again, not that strong in terms of musicianship. If you like this one, you've got to really have an ear and a fondness for those extremely raw amateur sounding recordings. And you also have to have pretty deep pockets. This one did not turn up very often. I only found a few entries for it. And yeah, one copy for $2,100 and another that made it just over the $4,000 mark. This is another one that had a micro pressing. I've seen numbers like 100 and even less for this one. I don't know the exact number. Again, legends and rumors vary depending on who you ask sometimes. But yeah, this is a very difficult one to find, much less afford, if you want the original. But again, you can track it down otherwise. There's a very cheap bootleg CD in circulation, so you can have a physical copy of it if you want for very little money. And of course, you can find the tracks online if you just want to check it out. Very heavy, very raw, very aggressive stuff. It's kind of charming in a way, but yeah, don't listen to this if missed notes or stellar musicianship, or things that you're looking into. Okay, last one for the day is the Messiah Going Insane 12-inch EP. These guys were out of Detroit. They released this in 1985. Unlike most of the bands I've mentioned today, Messiah did have other recordings. Prior to this, they had already made a full-length album called Final Warning. So this wasn't their one and only vinyl offering. The Final Warning album is also pretty desired by collectors. It'll bring a couple of $100 last time I checked. But the EP here can sell significantly higher than that. Messiah was a Christian metal band. If you've watched videos over on the YouTube channel Metal Theologian, Aaron has mentioned this band several times. How much does an original Messiah bring you? It's another one that's kind of in that $1,000 to $1,500 mark. Multiple copies have gotten into that price range. Now, this is one that I think has had a more recent repressing, and it'll be interesting to see if that kind of brings down the price. Sometimes being able to buy a more affordable vinyl copy is all some people really want from the record. And they're like, yeah, maybe one day I'll save up and buy that $1,000 copy. Oh, wait, now I can get a copy for $25. Sure, that's fine. I'm not going to invest so heavily in that. I've had collectors tell me that before, like, yeah, I was saving up for this record, but someone put out a bootleg and I think I'll just buy that and save the money for something else, which, hey, that's understandable. Paying huge prices for a single record, that's not something most folks can do. And even for folks that do it, they typically understand that, yeah, that's not easy for them. They may have to save for a long time to do that. Okay, so that gets us through our list of 10 for the day. So let's start wrapping up, and then let's keep talking metal in the comments down below. So let's say tomorrow somebody hands you a blank check, and the only stipulation is that you can only use that check to buy one single heavy metal record. Which one would you want to buy? Would it be one of the 10 that I've shown today? Or is there something else that's always been sort of your secret? That's the holy grail item that I'd really like, but just can't afford. Do you want a Yellow Goat Bathory, one of the Deathlike Silence LPs, or some other obscure rare thing? Maybe you want one of the high-dollar Iron Maiden or Metallica things. Let me know in the comments down below. There's always lots of other cool high-dollar things out there, and everybody likes something a little different. Myself, if I was picking from this list, I'd probably go for the Iron Cross LP. There's another record that sells for an awful lot of money that probably I would take over Iron Cross, but it didn't make this list, so maybe I'll mention that one in a future video. All right, and as I wrap up today, just want to give a few shout outs to folks. Quick hello to Rick over at YouTube channel The Dreadful Minutes. Rick has started making some videos lately. He's a really nice guy, really into doom metal, so I'm looking forward to hearing about some cool doom stuff from him in the near future. Also, hello to Aaron over at Metal Theologian. Aaron's had a long-running YouTube channel that covers lots of cool, rare, obscure, heavy metal, vinyl, and such. Great resource. You should definitely check that out if you're not familiar with it already. And also wanted to say hi to Matt over at YouTube channel The Dark Path. Matt's a really cool guy. He did a really good video on the catalog of Ulver recently. So if you're into Ulver or just lots of different styles of sort of darker, heavier metal, Matt's videos are usually really interesting, something you should definitely check out as well. All right, with that, I'm going to bring this to an end. Hope you enjoyed the content. I'll talk to you again soon.